Order. Welcome to meeting number 17 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. The website will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, October 28th, the committee will commence its study of the review of the employment insurance program. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussion with 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by questions. We have with us from the Department of Employment and Social Development, Benoit Long, Chief Transformation Officer, Andrew Brown, Director General, and Michael McPhee, Director General. I'm not sure if this is necessary, but for the benefit of the witnesses, I'll just offer a few additional comments. Interpretation of the video conference will work very much like an in-person committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly, and when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Mr. Long, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. The Government of Canada's legacy systems that support the delivery of our key income support programs are among the oldest IT systems in Canada still in use today. The EI system is nearly 50 years old, the CPP one is 20, and the OAS system is nearly 60. And the age of the condition of these systems are a continued concern for ESDC. Building and maintaining enterprise IT system is a high-risk item for governments, and with low public visibility. Canadians do not think about benefits delivery systems until they fail. The 2010 OAG report provides a full measure of the risks that we manage every day to deliver benefits that over 9 million people depend on every day to live. As a result of a section of budget investments, ESDC has made progress in addressing technical debt on EI, CPP, and OAS, and ensuring that benefit payments continue to flow. There are considerable costs and risk in continuing to extend the life and add on to the aged systems. Some of these include upgrades to reflect new policy changes that are costly, sometimes present significant and unsolvable technological obstacles, given the state of these legacy systems. Some of the code is in a language that's so archaic, it's really no longer taught in universities, and critical personnel retire and their knowledge slowly gets lost. Decision makers value optionality in EI, of course, as governments have always sought optionality in those cases. And it allows targeting in particular groups who need help. This challenge has also led to a complex web of rules and code built out over nearly 5 decades. And the people who can program this custom system are becoming fewer and harder to find. As you may recall from last year, there were many stories in the United States about many states unable to reconfigure their UI systems because they couldn't find the right personnel to do the work. The complex application and processing requirements that underpin these legacy systems lead to higher rates of error, mistakes, mispayments, fraud, cost money, and shake citizens' trust in our systems. And these systems were never intended for today's needs, both of Canadians or public servants supporting the government and citizens alike. Finally, applying for benefits on these old systems can be complicated and confusing. The number of unclaimed benefits is high, particularly in the pension piece. And those are unpaid are almost always our country's most vulnerable, including low-income seniors, Indigenous people, and persons with disabilities. So, of course, we do have a plan. Our goal is to build on the EI service quality review that was done a couple of years ago, which showed that many Canadians feel they're waiting too long for the benefits they need. The panel's recommendations at the time were for improvements to the EI program, including to replace outdated technology systems. In 2020, the Government of Canada announced in its speech from the throne that the government will make generational investments in updating outdated IT systems to modernize the way that government serves Canadians, from the elderly to the young, from people who are looking for work to those living with a disability. And moreover, over the coming months, the EI system will become the sole delivery mechanism for employment benefits, including for Canadians who did not qualify for EI before the pandemic. And the pandemic has shown that Canada needs an EI system for the 21st century, including for the self-employed and those in the gig economy. So replacing our legacy system is no longer an option to consider. It's critical to continue to do that in order to allow the government to continue to function. The government has some solid lessons learned in terms of what to do and not to do. On the do list, avoid big bang approaches. That's even more important when people's pay is at risk. Apply agile project management techniques. That means iterative, incremental, progressive builds. That's the best way to solve problems and to channel innovation. On the don't list, maybe a bit longer, have the government assume all of the risks. Avoid having the government assume all of the risks in building big IT systems. The private sector has spent billions in producing commercial off-the-shelf systems. Governments around the world are partnering with the private sector to avoid the expense, difficulty, and uncertainty of designing and implementing custom systems. Canada continues to be well advised to do the same. We should let planning be the enemy of doing. Never let planning be the enemy of doing, sorry. Big IT systems are expensive and complex and take a long time to build and benefit from numerous checks. Traditional project management approaches may not be sufficient and may not be adequate for today's world. And the government has adopted some internationally well-known and best practices in this context. Finally, introducing BDM. The BDM is an acronym for Benefits Delivery Modernization. It's been 3 years in the making. We've been doing a lot of planning and we're poised to start implementing in the next few months. That's our goal for sure. And working with TBS and ESDC, the Treasury Board, and the department, we've designed a mission critical transformation program to meet and succeed at delivering this historic mandate. It's going to require tailored governance, iterative and incremental building, as well as the best talent that the public service can bring together, as well as people from across the world we've been recruiting to help us out. We're going to build a BDM platform over a number of years in a series of tranches, phases, if you prefer. And frankly, we're going to start this year with putting the foundations as soon as all the approvals have been obtained. The new BDM foundation will be very agile and provide a set of capabilities that will allow future benefits to be deployed on that platform, similar to what the private sector does. We're procuring a commercial off-the-shelf technology. That's our goal. That's already useful and also successfully used across the world in many jurisdictions, subnational governments, which has been tested often and deployed on complex benefits like the ones we have. We've put in place an ecosystem, that's our word, a series of qualified suppliers who are going to help us. And they're all world-class organizations that are meant to come together, work in partnership with us to deliver as quickly as possible the best possible systems that the government can put in place. Finally, the BDM platform, and I'll close on this, is going to expedite the onboarding of many benefits. I think it has been the goal of many ministers and deputy ministers of our department to be able to respond much more quickly to policies that governments want to introduce and generally start. We'd love to be able to do this, Minister, but it's very difficult, and frankly, our systems may not be able to support that. So we'd like to change that as quickly as possible. We definitely want to personalize and tailor the systems and the benefits to the needs of clients. We want digital by design approaches, omni-channel, multi-channel experiences where people can apply in one channel and complete an application in another, and obviously bring client experiences to par, similar to what people would expect from the private sector. I'll close on this at this point, Mr. Chair. My two colleagues are here to obviously not only answer questions about the current state of EI, but also what we're trying to do in the future. So we look forward to your questions, and merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Long. And we are going to begin with questions now, starting with the Conservatives. Ms. Doncho, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Long, for your opening remarks. Greatly appreciate you being here with us today. I'm wondering if your department is considering an extension of the CRB, given the substantial number of Canadians who are about to reach their 26-week maximum benefit next month.
I think I'll defer the question to Andrew Brown, if that's possible. Who's our lead in policy?
Sure. Thank you, Benoit, and thanks for the question. So just say I'm Andrew Brown, the Director General for Employment Insurance Policy, and that also includes policy for the Canada Recovery Benefits. I think what I can tell you right now is that we are monitoring very closely the use of those benefits. We know that since the end of September, when people moved from the CERB to EI regular benefits and others would have started to receive the Canada Recovery benefits, that they could use up the 26 weeks of benefits available as early as the end of March. And so we are continuing to monitor use.
Are you looking to extend it, or that must be something you're modeling?
So we're trying to understand the number of people that could be running out of benefits so that we can provide options.
Pardon me, sorry. We know the Canadian Labour Congress has come out today suggesting or asking that you extend it. So I would be surprised if you weren't modeling it already.
So exactly, we're looking at the numbers, trying to understand how many people may run out at the end of March.
Okay. So how much has been spent to date on the 3 CRB benefits?
In terms of the 3 benefits to date, we've seen now more than 1.7 million Canadians make use of the Canada Recovery benefit, more like about 300,000 that have made use of the Recovery Sickness benefit, and I believe a slightly higher number, not in front of me right now, of the number that have used the Canada Recovery Caregiving
Do you know
benefit.
how much that's cost? Like what's been the total payout?
I should be able to get that within, I think, a few minutes. I don't have that right in front of me.
We can come back to it at the end. Just wondering, I know that the CERB, as mentioned by Mr. Long and elsewhere, that the CERB is not coming out of EI, that it's going to go come out of general revenue or deficit financed. Is that the same plan for CRB, or will the CRB come out of the EI account?
Okay, so the CRB is not coming from the EI account. It is coming from the Consolidated Revenue Fund. I've actually got the numbers here now.
Great.
So in terms of the Canada Recovery benefit, it's now just under 10 billion, 9.6 billion to date. In terms of the sickness benefit, Canada Recovery Sickness benefit, it's 328 million to date. And in terms of the Canada Recovery Caregiving benefit, it's 1.34 billion to date. So those are the latest figures that we've got available.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And regarding the EI that's been paid out to date, have you seen a jump in how much EI from the EI account itself, not CERB and not CRB, but do you anticipate an increase for what that will cost for 2020 versus 2019 and as well as 2021? Will there be more than normal is what I'm asking for 2020 and 2019?
There would certainly be more than normal paid out from the EI operating account. And that really comes from 2 factors. One is simply that because of the economic conditions of many people having been laid off, there's that. There's also the impact of the temporary measures providing greater access and greater generosity, that minimum $500 per week benefit rate. And so roughly speaking, we estimated that would be over the course of the year about $10 billion additional.
10 billion additional. Okay, that's quite substantial. And as you're aware, as I'm aware, that there's that. I know the EI premiums have been frozen until 2023 when they can go up again. Have you modeled the maximum increase? Do you believe that the maximum increase for premiums, which is 5 cents a year, will be required starting in 2023 to ensure that balance in the account over the 7 years? Do you anticipate that will be required?
Right now, I mean, the challenge is understanding where the economics will go over the next, in fact, 7 years to determine what the increase is. Certainly, there's upward pressure in terms of increased benefits, which could push premium rates up. I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that what was also done with the CERB, which was, of course, very substantial spending, was that that will not be charged to the EI operating account.
Right.
So,
which would really push it over the limit, I'm sure, which
absolutely.
is why, it was not done that way. But it sounds like there's going to be, as you said, 10 billion more for EI being paid out. So I would anticipate that there would be considerable pressure as soon as those premiums, the freeze on those premiums is alleviated in 2023, that there would be a pressure to ensure that balance over 7 years. I think that's a correct assumption.
Indeed, that's correct. So normally,
if I just may ask, are you considering changing legislation to that 7-year balance? That's my first question. My second one, my last one is, are you considering changing the increase of only 5 cents maximum, maybe to 10 cents, 15 cents? Are you modeling that 7 years and the yearly maximum increase?
So I can certainly say that we're taking a look at what the impact would be in terms of the premium rate. But in terms of changes to rate setting policy, that's something that the government would need to bring forward legislation to change the parameters, because right now there is a 5-cent legislative
Right,
limit
as I said.
in terms of the change from year to year.
Okay, so it is something that you're obviously looking at, considering the pressure that we're seeing this year and, as you said, next year as well.
Certainly, whenever we take a look at a policy change, we're looking as well at what the impact would be on EI premiums.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Mr. Long. Mr. Chair, I believe that's all the time I have.
You are correct, and thank you for recognizing that. Mr. Long, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to my colleagues, and thank you to Mr. Long. I like that last name for your presentation to us this afternoon. Look, I'll state the obvious. EI benefits are there to catch people who lose work through no fault of their own. They're there to support Canadians, and I think that all of us have seen firsthand and are so thankful for the EI program, because millions of Canadians needed that program through this pandemic. And I wonder where we would be as a country without that program. So, Mr. Long, I do have some questions for you. In 2017, 2018, EI sickness benefits provided $1.7 billion in support to 412,000 claimants. The average duration of sickness benefits was 10 weeks. However, 36% of claimants exhausted EI benefits before they were able to return to work. One of the government's commitments is to increase EI sickness benefits from 15 to 26 weeks. Can you please explain for the committee as to how many people would benefit as a result of expanding the duration of this benefit?
Thank you, Mr. Long. I'll pass the question over to our policy colleague as well. Sorry.
For sure. No problem.
Sure. And thanks for the question, Mr. Long. As you pointed out, the EI sickness benefit right now does provide support to just over, I would say, 400,000 people annually, with about 35 or 36% of them making use of all 15 weeks of benefits that are available. So the relatively simple math there is that perhaps then 120,000 people might benefit from that extension from 15 weeks to 26 weeks. It's important to recognize that whenever we make adjustments to the EI sickness benefit, that there are other things that are attached to that. There are some employers who provide different kinds of top-ups to sickness benefits. There are also employers who take part in what's called the premium reduction program. And this is something that provides them and employees with a reduction on EI premiums in exchange for the fact that they have sickness plans that meet certain standards. So just to say that if it were extended, we might also provide some additional support to that group as well. We'd have to do some more detailed modeling to get you a more precise figure.
Okay, thanks for that. Whoever wants to take this, but do you have any additional improvements you can recommend that we could make to bridge the gap between EI sickness and long-term disability, like the CPP disability? We get asked that a lot in the office.
So, that's another great question, and it is also a challenging one, I would say, in that the two programs have. While it's true one seems to be more short-term and one longer-term, they really do have different objectives. In the case of EI, it is providing some temporary income support for people who are expected to then return to work, in fact, even to their own job, versus Canada Pension Plan Disability, which is focused on people with a severe and prolonged disability of some kind, essentially people that are not expected to be able to work again. So, I guess what I would say in the short term, the extension of EI sickness benefits is something that would go quite some way to address that gap. But I think it would be important to really study and understand that group that's in the middle, if you will. And how
there's
best to provide.
There's many in the middle, and that's one of the issues certainly we face here. I just want to switch over to the caregiver benefit. And in opening comments, it was discussed that the EI family caregiver benefit that our government introduced in the previous parliament and how it provides support to eligible workers who need to take time off of work to provide care or support for an adult or child who is critically ill or injured. Can you share with the committee as to what impact this benefit has had on families, including what the take-up has been?
Sure, and I'll have to look and see if I've got those figures in terms of take-up of the new caregiving benefits. But I would say, first off, these were changes that were brought about at the end of 2017 to create a new family caregiver benefit for adults and for children. Mm-hmm. And this was to lower the bar in terms of how I might describe it, the condition that the person is in when someone's able to provide care to them and receive caregiving benefits. So prior to that, we had only the compassionate care benefit. And that was for someone, and is today still, for someone at end of life. So if somebody essentially has received a medical certificate where the doctor indicates that they're at significant risk of death within 26 weeks, that's the end of care. The critical illness has a lower bar and allows people to apply to provide care to someone perhaps after a severe car accident, something that would leave them in a critical illness or injury situation, but not necessarily about to die. So there's been more people that have been taking up the caregiving benefits since then. Would have to try to get back to you on the specific figures.
Thank you, Mr. Long and Mr.
Thank you,
Brown.
Chair. Thank you.
Suite Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. First of all, I'd like to tell you that I'm very, very pleased to see that we're going to have this study on employment insurance reform. This is one of the issues that the Bloc Québécois has been asking for a number of years. It's a regime that hasn't been looked at in quite a while. It covers 40% of workers in this country, at least. And the shortcomings of the regime, we can see they're highlighted because of the pandemic. We get hundreds of thousands of individuals who were out of a job overnight, and the system couldn't really provide as it should, adequately at least. So it's nice to see that there's a half a dozen new benefits. A reform of the regime is absolutely essential, and whether it's eligibility, qualifying periods, waiting time, and quite recently the minister provided this mandate, charged the departments to review and reform the system. So this is in the context in which this study is being undertaken. There's a lot of interest in the issues, and many, many groups are looking forward to coming and testify before the committee. So my interest, based on the mandate, the minister's mandate, and the questions I asked her here at the committee, what items are you particularly working on at this time? Thank you very much for your question, Madam Chabot. There is a considerable amount of work going on, and the reform of the regime, of the system. We're looking at quite a variety of factors and issues right now for improving the lot of the average worker in Canada. As you've mentioned, you said 40% of workers are, well, looking for or requiring some assistance by way of employment insurance. So it's well past time to take a look at the issues and the policy, especially on access to the employment insurance system. The other aspect or feature that the government has announced in its throne speech was the importance of recognizing those workers who are not in conventional, traditional type of employed jobs, the gig economy, the autonomous workers, those with temporary, short-term employment. This style of employment today, it's changed a lot. So we need to have a system that responds to these various scenarios throughout the country. Now, if I'm to understand correctly, there are studies underway, modeling underway, to take a look at the totality of these issues, or are you looking more specifically on this issue or that issue? Well, we're looking forward. We're looking to the future. But, of course, as we are totally embedded or mired in this pandemic, we have to look at income support in the short term, right now, for workers in Canada. We certainly hope that perhaps by the fall or early next year that we'll be in a position to go ahead with our longer-term plan, more reforms to the system as a whole. Well, I'll close on this next question because it's all the time I have. You know as well as I do that these temporary measures which have been implemented will come to an end on the 26th of September. For certain beneficiaries, we're going to run out of benefit and run out of money at the same time. So my question essentially is that by the end of September, if we want to reform the system, I think we will have to try as best as we can to have that system in place as soon as possible and not struggle along with the current one. You're absolutely right. We know that the end of March is even closer at hand, and we have to ensure that we make it past that milepost first. We're developing strategies for the middle term and the long term to support the government. Thank you, Madame Chabot. Madame Gazan.
Thank you, Chair. My question, I think, can be answered by Mr. Brown, certainly, and Mr. Long. It might be a shared answer. So we know that the pandemic has, caused financial turmoil for many people. Many people, for example, are experiencing being unsheltered for the first time. We're in a crisis. A report came out through Senator Pate's office, which indicated the following, that the PBO estimated that providing a guaranteed livable income would cost $76 billion for a typical year. In extraordinary circumstances of increased unemployment associated with COVID-19, providing the same form of guaranteed livable income for 6 months could cost $47.5 billion. The actual cost, we know, and economists have certainly demonstrated, would be much lower. Due to cost savings over time. We know there's higher front-end costs, but we know that there's a savings over time. Considering the ongoing issues with EI, the confusion caused through COVID-19, is your department considering moving towards more permanent, guaranteed livable income programs in light of the fact that it looks like the pandemic's going to go on? Rates of unemployment are increasing. So I'll leave it there.
So thanks again for the question, Ms. Gazan. I would say that, so you're raising very important point about a guaranteed livable income or other ways that we could be providing income support to Canadians. I think from my perspective and what I'm able to speak to in my role is that we've been looking at what can be done through the employment insurance program, and by its nature, it's then focused on the income supports for people who are working in some way, currently focused on those in employed work, and we would need to then think about how it could be expanded to others. But of course, an element is that people are paying premiums. Beyond that, I can't.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I asked that because I know Mr. Long pointed to a number of bureaucratic issues within EI. That's costly. And I'm just wondering and would recommend, actually, I know it's a study, that might be looked into, exploring the cost to keep people in a system that's not working, towards moving towards systems that are more inclusive in terms of spreading guaranteed income programs out. So I actually have another question. So I want to talk a little bit about temporary foreign workers and seasonal agricultural workers who pay into EI benefits, but since they are leaving the country when they're done working, they don't actually benefit from programs that they're paying into. This has been raised for a long time. Why is this still the case? Is there any plan to rectify this situation? I'm not sure who can answer that, sorry.
Sure. So maybe I'll begin. Thanks again for the question. And I guess to begin with, of course, the EI program does work sort of on the basis of universal coverage, so that workers pay in, and then if they're laid off, for example, they're able to access the benefits. In the case of a temporary foreign worker, they can do that while they are in Canada in terms of receiving EI regular benefits. But if that person then leaves the country, they're no longer at that point available and looking for work, so they would not be eligible to receive EI regular benefits. In other words, for job
so
loss.
we know this happens. We know people come to work and they leave. They provide essential services for Canada. They leave. They don't benefit. Don't you think that's problematic? And I'm wondering why nothing's being done about it. People paying into programs. We know they're not going to benefit from the systems. To burden people to pay out of their often inadequate salaries for programs they won't even benefit from. I find that problematic. Is there any plans to change that?
So again, I guess what I'm just trying to make sure that the committee's aware is that there are people who are benefiting, who are temporary foreign workers, and so with an insurance program, you pay the premiums, and then if you meet the conditions, you can receive payment. If you aren't, for example, laid off, you also don't receive any payment from the program. So, I mean, those are the rules as they are at the moment. And I think it's one of the risks is that if you were to, for example, indicate that temporary foreign workers would not have to pay premiums, is that you could be making it cheaper for employers to hire temporary foreign workers rather than Canadians or permanent residents. So just to say that it is a difficult, an area that needs to be reviewed very carefully before moving.
Yeah, I see, and I'll leave it at that. But I just want to say, if there's anything COVID has shown us, is the abuse of temporary and migrant workers. This has been an ongoing issue that has not been addressed. I would argue that that's one. Certainly what you've presented is one part. The other part is another way that temporary workers and seasonal workers are exploited in our country. So my last question is about gig workers.
That was your last question, Ms.
I have a million questions. Thank you, Chair.
You're going to get another turn.
Thank you.
Mr. Viss, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today. Just a quick point of clarification. You mentioned that you call it the legacy system. It's basically an antique. When was the last time our EI system technology was updated?
The technology itself has been updated over the last 50 years, quite a number of times. I would say if you were an archaeologist, you'd look every 10 years or so, and there's always been a new investment put in, but it has made it so complex and difficult that now we're at a point where making changes requires us testing everything back to 50 years ago. So that's problematic. There hasn't been
okay, wow. Okay, no, that answers my question. I think you guys should get into negotiations with the Canadian Museum of Science and Technology and maybe like create a or a heritage minute about when this program's finally changed, that we could have a heritage minute, and hopefully we won't have to wait on the line so long for to speak with someone about our EI claim. But I joke. But I did appreciate your opening deck. The 2019 AG report on call centers recommended that ESDC improve callers' access to live agents. ESDC agreed, stating that their current ability to manage and improve access to a call center agent is limited by the existing technology, which we just covered, but secondly, the funding. Has the funding been put in place to actually improve the system now? You just put yourself on mute.
My apologies. I was actually going to start and ask if Mike wanted to contribute. Mike has been a longtime manager of the capacity in the call centers themselves, so he would know a lot. The government did make significant investments in the technology as well as the workloads and supports, so to improve that situation. Of course, the 2022 situation is historically different than anything we've ever lived before, but the government did move and did put funding forward.
So the funding is in place now?
It is.
Good. A modernization plan was planned for 2020. Did the pandemic delay that, or has it already begun?
No, that's the part of my presentation, was to explain where we are on the modernization program. It has proceeded. Of course, we had to divert about 25% of our resources to deal with the emerging emergencies, if you wish. But we were able to actually deploy a new system, even if temporary, and dealt with 2 new benefits last year. So it was quite an achievement during a pandemic. We're very proud of that, as well as, of course, the CERB work that was done.
Thank you. Obviously, the previous business risk management plan to deal with a pandemic by the department was woefully inadequate because we wouldn't have had to switch our major benefits to the Canada Revenue Agency from Employment and Social Development Canada. Has the department's business risk management plan been updated for a future pandemic?
So I think I'm okay. So I think that part of the modernization program is the response to a change in business continuity issues. I would say that part of what we are obviously doing today is imagining a different future with better systems and newer systems. Last year, when we were dealing with the CERB and the requirements, the system was unable to actually accommodate a lot of change very quickly, including we were quite nervous about the volume of transactions that would actually take place. And that's why a decision was made to split it.
So if there was, say, the South African variant of COVID-19 explodes and we have to shut down our entire country again and millions of Canadians have to go back on employment insurance, would the system be able to manage that today?
Yes, it would.
Thank you. That's reassuring. In your opening remarks, you expressed confidence, in the new BDM process and the gradual rollout. Will the rollout be on a geographic or a benefit by benefit basis?
It will be on a benefit by benefit basis. And part of the reason for that is other countries have tried different methods, so postal codes, geographic areas, groups of people. In our case, EI in particular is made up of 7 core benefits, and we have to go 1 benefit at a time because for 7 years, we will have to run the old system and the new system at the same time. And it was too complicated technologically to do it differently.
Thank you. And just going back to my concerns about telephone services and the frontline interaction that Canadians have with Service Canada on these matters, when can we expect reasonable improvements in the live call agent response times to Canadians?
A more complicated question. Obviously, more funding has added capacity, and it's helped us being able to deal with some of the surge issues. But there's no question these are historic levels of claims and recipients, and I think we should expect many months yet before we get to normal results, assuming we don't get through multiple new waves of COVID, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Viss, and thank you, Mr. Long. We're going to go to Mr. Dong, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I want to thank the witnesses for coming to committee, answering some very important questions today. Thank you very much. And through you to all the public servants at ESDC, I understand and appreciate the challenges and the efforts they putting to fight these challenges under the extraordinary circumstances. First, on behalf of my constituency in Don Valley North, I also want to echo the concern brought forward earlier. The call centers in response to individuals seems to be that there's a long wait time on the call. Sometimes it's just a simple correction of a mistake when they use the automated system. So any improvement you can do on that front, that'd be greatly appreciated. I just want to share that. I want to talk about first the parental and maternity leave, maternity benefit. We know that the government has improved these benefits to, in a few ways. To first of all to cover 12 weeks prior to the birth for expecting mom, and also allowing parents to choose between standard parental benefit and extended parental benefit for 18 months, and also to share the parental benefit as well. So I just want you to share with us that with these changes, what kind of impact it has been on young families and parents, and what kind of, if you can share some observation on what the feedbacks on these programs.
Great. Thanks for the question, Mr. Dong. The changes to maternity and parental benefits, so I think you have really hit upon those there. There were the first set in 2017, which allowed parents to choose between either standard or extended parental benefits, and that gave the possibility, along with maternity benefits, to receive benefits over a longer period of time, up to 18 months rather than 12 months. And what we've seen there is that about 15% of families have been choosing the extended duration sort of configuration. So they have, we can infer from that, found that is preferential for their own circumstances. We don't know the exact reasons for that. We are planning to do some evaluation work to understand better why they're selecting that. But we do believe that in some provinces, it helps them in terms of some of the childcare responsibilities as well. And that might be the reason that they're opting for the longer period. I should note that on that one, there have also been some negative feedback around one aspect of it, which is that over the longer period of 18 months, that people receive, of course, a lower benefit rate. And so some questions have been raised as to whether that's sufficient. So what people receive is effectively the same amount of benefits, but over a longer period of time. The second thing I would just very quickly, in terms of the new parental sharing benefit, that was introduced in 2019 and made available for a second parent, sort of some 5 weeks of benefits that were reserved. And in many cases, of course, as we still traditionally see that women and mothers are taking the majority of parental benefits, that really often means a father. And we have started to see an uptake in terms of the parental benefits by fathers. And so this is one of the things that we're really keen to keep watching in coming years to see if that grows further.
Any advice on how these programs can be improved? Because we've heard some reports on that with the COVID years that we're expecting a significant increase in childbirth in the coming years.
So, I think the things to watch out for here, especially we pay attention to what the, academics are talking about in terms of these programs, as well as supports to families and maintaining a connection to work after that period of leave. They've often pushed for a higher replacement rate in that area. And the other thing that they have pushed for is for easier access in the case of maternity and parental benefits. So I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind right now in this temporary EI that we're working through is that the access requirements are much lower at the moment, helping people to access the program. But as was raised earlier, those are temporary measures will be expiring at the end of September.
This program
you,
is
Mr.
very
Dong.
important for gender equality,
Yeah.
so keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dong. Suite Madame Chabot pour 2 minutes et demie.
2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. Last spring, the Honorable Minister Duclos, President Treasury Board, declared, of course we were at the height of the crisis, that we have been taking too long to reform the employment insurance system. Well, now we have a great opportunity. I think there'll be a number of studies stemming from this. Are there any particular issues that you are particularly interested in, Mr. Brown? Or I know I heard the IT presentation, and that was a huge challenge on its own. But I was thinking more the programming part, operational.
Chabot, and there's a number of things I would say that we're looking at. One of the things was that in our minister's mandate letter, there is quite a list of different commitments that the government has made. We've heard already about the proposal to extend the sickness benefit from 15 weeks to 26 weeks. We're also looking at how we might make progress on the other items in that mandate letter. So things that would look at the supports that are provided to workers in seasonal employment and issues that we've heard there about consistent access to benefits. We are, as I mentioned before, I think one of the things is certainly that 40% and looking at access to the program. So we're trying to look very broadly. I mean, of course, we'll need it'll be the government that will need to decide how to take things forward. But I would say that we are really trying to look at what can be put in place in terms of supports for workers. We're also thinking about the connection to what's often called part 2 of the program. These are the labor market transfer agreements to provinces and territories. Donc, ces ententes pour soutenir la formation,
to support training, other labor market, to help workers reintegrate the workforce or upskill. Not only benefits as benefits, of course, income supports, but supports to return back to work. Thank you, Madame Chabot.
Please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My next question is in regards to gig workers. We know that gig workers have been gutted by COVID. I represent a riding where we have a very dynamic and a talented arts community who have just been gutted as a result of COVID. We know that even during the pandemic and knowing all of this left behind, even from programs, even from being included from programs. And I know that there's been some exceptions made. It's not good enough. I'm wondering if the ESDC will be taking any steps to expand benefits for gig workers.
Great, and thanks for that question as well, Ms. Gazan. We are absolutely looking at what can be done for gig workers in the future. This is part of the commitment to take a look at EI for the 21st century and think about how to provide support to self-employed workers and gig workers. Specifically, we're also trying to understand what has worked or not worked in terms of CERB and the Canada Recovery Benefit. This was, as you know, really the first time that we've tried to provide support to a different group of workers other than people who are receiving a regular paycheck. And it's certainly a challenging area.
Just because I have limited time, I say that because, although you're researching it, people need help now. Like, we've been in the pandemic for a year. We've had a year to review programs to ensure that gig workers have what they need to survive. That's clearly not happening. And I'm actually very concerned with your response because we need immediate action. Is there any plans for immediate action to protect people working in the gig economy?
So again, I'm able to speak to the sorts of income supports that are available. I mean, somebody who's a gig worker who has met the $5,000 requirement in terms of income in 2019 or 2020 would be able to access the Canada Recovery benefits. In terms of what's happening as they're continuing to work, that's not an area that I'd be able to comment on.
Which is also concerning. I just want to add, because there's been all sorts of issues around what that $5,000 meant and who qualified or not. Like, I'm glad that there's, the government is now loosening the strings on making people pay that back. But moving forward, what is that going to look like? It's just been very unclear, and it's caused a lot of stress, I know, for many people in my riding.
Thank you, Ms. Kazan. Mr. Tucker, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I share some of the concerns with MP Kazan about people's lives are at stake here with looking for EI benefits which they've earned and they've paid for. And I'm a little concerning with the direction that we're going to do another study, or from this that we're working on a study. And without going back to the last, I think, larger study on EI and back in June 2016 on the 42nd Parliament, exploring the impacts of recent changes to employment insurance and ways to improve access to the program, is the study I'd like to talk about. And the number one recommendation, and I think it's very fitting that we talk about the first recommendation, which is going to be important during a pandemic. It is the committee's recommends that the federal government review the eligibility requirement for valid job separation to allow for employment insurance claimants who find a new job during the benefit period to retain their EI benefits should the employment not be suitable. So in the context, I'm worried about the families and individuals out there that maybe have lost a job, unfortunately, because of the restrictions that are out there, or are claiming EI, find another job, but then we have another maybe lockdown that occurs in your province and they're out of work. So I'd like to hear an update on the number one recommendation from that report. Has the EI program been added to the flexibility so that these workers don't fall through the cracks?
Okay, thanks again for the question, Mr. Tucker. And so since the last report, there were some adjustments in terms of the sort of job search requirements while people were receiving EI. That was actually to return to an earlier set of rules prior to some measures that were taken in 2013, referred to often as connecting Canadians with available jobs. So there were some adjustments there. In terms of that specific requirement to make adjustments to what are considered valid job separations, that has not changed. So it is true that someone who, let's call it a layoff, is receiving EI regular benefits and then finds a new job, returns to that job, or takes that new job, and if that person were then to quit that job, they would no longer be eligible for EI benefits. So I believe that that is the sort of situation that is raising. If that person is laid off, they still are eligible. That's a different sort of situation. But the valid job separation is always referring to the nature of the way in which they leave that employment.
So Mr. Brown, like that's. And this is not your fault on you, but it's been 5 years. Number one recommendation out of this report hasn't been acted upon. And now that we find ourselves in a pandemic, and this is a question for the Liberal minister over the years on why that recommendation hasn't been fulfilled, because I think there's people falling through the cracks because the recommendation out of a study wasn't followed. And a little disappointed in that, but once again, that's not on you guys per se. It's more on, I believe, the policy coming out of the government. Changing gears a little bit on the people that have fallen through the cracks and families that have had difficulties during this pandemic. After the initial rush in March of people applying for EI, I understand that there is something like 3,000 Service Canada employees the government deployed to help get through the call volume. And to quote a CBC article from May the 7th, that clearly that hasn't been enough, the 3,000 Service Canada employees that were redirected. Was that like a failure on simply on assigning that we did assigning insufficient resources, or was there a technical limitations that kept Service Canada from assigning sufficient staff?
Sorry, I can start and perhaps Mike will come in. I would say that first, the department responded extraordinarily quickly. We had a few hundred people who could work remotely in the first week of the pandemic. Within about 6 weeks, we had 28,000 that were online working from home. So I think what you're seeing is quickly a department that was able to deploy both technology and equipment to its employees. To put 3,000 people quickly into that mode was quite rapid for us. We'd never done that before. Of course, it's not enough, but it's really because of the historical demand and the wave that was hit through the department. We don't believe that there was anything more than really we actually did accomplish. The challenge is how to sustain that. We have people working from home from every part of the country. In the context of call centers, we have to train people. They have to be able to answer questions. People would get extremely aggravated if they were calling and the people they were reaching could not answer those questions. So not everyone is an EI agent, nor are they a pension agent. So I don't mean to say that we've done enough. Certainly we did our very best, but certainly we also acted quite quickly. And the technology itself was deployed relatively rapidly because investments had been made the year or two before in that specific technology. Without modern technology and telephony, we would have been unable completely to respond to this pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Mr. Tucker, finally, we're going to go to Mr. Turnbull, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for being here. I want to echo the comments of my colleague, Mr. Dong, in terms of thanking you for your hard work. Really appreciate all of the work that you must be putting in a time when Canadians really need you. So thank you for that. I want to go back to the gig worker, self-employed conversation. Those individuals surely have challenges accessing EI. I'd like to just ask you a very open-ended question, because my understanding is self-employed workers do not pay EI premiums unless they opt into the EI program. Is that right, Mr. Long?
So I'll jump in
Mr.
there,
Benoit. Okay, thanks.
Sure. So thanks for the question, Mr. Turnbull. And with respect to self-employed workers, they may opt into the EI program to obtain access to special benefits. So not to job loss benefits. They are not eligible for those at all. In terms of opting in to obtain access to special benefits like maternity and parental sickness benefits, it's a very small proportion of workers that do. About 25,000 self-employed workers have opted in out of about perhaps 2 to 3 million self-employed workers across the country. So I think what we've seen is that given the choice, people prefer not to pay into that insurance scheme, which could be for a number of reasons. The group that incidentally tends to opt in are younger women workers, and they're opting in as the only way that they can obtain access to maternity and parental benefits.
Thank you. So I recognize there's probably lots of challenges. What hurdles would we have to get through or get over in order to fully transition to a system where gig workers and self-employed individuals could have full access to the EI benefits regime?
Sure, and thanks for that question as well. So this is where I think then you'd need to think about, first off, whether this is something voluntary or whether it's mandatory. So if you think about workers who are employed workers, they haven't got an option. They are required to pay in. And then I think the second thing is really thinking about how would you assess their income? Because the thing is that for someone who is a paid worker, they're receiving a regular paycheck, whether that's weekly or bi-weekly. There's a clear sort of record of what they're receiving. The challenge then with self-employed and gig workers is that may not be the case. And the timing of their income can also vary. Sometimes they could be working consistently, yet only receive a paycheck or income, I guess I should say, a revenue, maybe once a month or once every say 4 months. If you think about a real estate agent, for example. So if you get a number of sales, you might get quite a bit of income at once. If you don't, it could be several months between receiving revenue. So there's a great diversity among self-employed workers and gig workers. That's where some of the challenge comes from.
Okay, great. Thanks for that answer. I wanted to just address the seasonal pilot project, the EI seasonal pilot project, and ask you a question about that as well. What was that pilot project's objectives, and how does it help address the so-called black hole where those seasonal workers benefits run out before they're back to work?
Great. So thanks for that question as well. And so, as I think people probably know, the trou noir is referring to, just as you said there, people who are in seasonal employment and where they qualify for EI benefits, but their benefits run out before their seasonal employment returns. And I think it was something that, as a result of quite low unemployment rates that we had for a number of years, it was exacerbated by that, because in times of lower unemployment, the number of weeks of benefits available is also lower. The purpose of the pilot was really to test another way to target additional supports to seasonal workers, and it was targeted in two ways. One were the regions, which were those with a higher proportion of seasonal workers, as well those that had a higher unemployment rate across the country. So there were those two elements which helped to identify the 13 regions for the pilot. The second was that we were trialing a definition of how we would define seasonal workers, and we were looking at their pattern of employment over the last 5 years to determine who seems to be making seasonal EI claims, hence meeting our definition. So those are the things we wanted to test, the ability to target this better than some of the pilots that we've had in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Colleagues, that completes 2 rounds of questions. We do have some committee business that we need to get to, and we've had something referred to us. But before I dismiss the witnesses, I'm going to exercise the chair's prerogative and pose one question. Probably for Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, I'm from Prince Edward Island, where there are 2 of the 62 EI zones in Canada. My question is, what is the process for the review and revision of those EI zones, and do they include public input?
So there would be an opportunity for some public input whenever there is a change that is made, because regulations do need to be pre-published before zones can be changed. But in terms of the process for reviewing the EI zones or boundaries, is actually led by the EI Commission. And so the last review was completed, I believe it was at the end of 2018. There were no changes taken forward subsequent to that. There's a new review that was launched. We're required to review those boundaries every 5 years, partly because, of course, they are used to administer the program. And once those results are presented to the Commission, they may or may not make recommendations to the minister in terms of changes to the boundaries. What we are doing when we review those boundaries is looking at whether each of the regions continues to be, is as homogeneous as possible in terms of labor market conditions and unemployment rate. Those are the 2 things that we are chiefly looking at, and we're trying to find the boundaries that provide labor market regions that are as sort of consistent as possible, also keeping in mind that we need to be able to administer it, so we probably don't want to create too many different regions. So 62 is where we are right now. There's a review in place. If there's a proposal to make any changes, that would be subject to a public regulatory review process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown and Mr. Long, Mr. McPhee. you've set the table for the beginning of our work on this study in a very comprehensive way. We greatly appreciate what you do on a day-to-day basis and being with us here this afternoon. So thank you so much. You are welcome to stay, but you're free to leave. And colleagues, please hold tight there. We've got a few things to work through in terms of committee business.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Bye.
To be able to get through. First, you will have received a news release regarding this study that I guess we need you to approve so that we can hit send. Secondly, there's a couple of budgets that need to be approved. Third, we've had a matter referred to us by the House, a private member's bill C-220. So we need to talk about that. And also the supplementary estimates C have been reported to us. So those are the things that I'd like to get through, and we can perhaps start with the news release. I trust that you've seen the draft release. Just by way of background, colleagues, the fact that we are doing an examination of the EI system has prompted some interest with various groups, and the clerk of the committee has been contacted. So we thought it a good idea to make a public statement so that there is information out there, and if people wish to submit briefs, as you can see on the press release, that there's an invitation, a clear public invitation there to do so. Any thoughts or comments on the news release? And are folks comfortable with us doing this? It's generally something that we do at the end of a study as opposed to the beginning of a study. The floor is open. Please use the raised hand function if you would. Je reconnais.
Ms. Chabot. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I've had a look at it, and I think it's a good idea. It's a good way to start off on the right foot. And yes, it has drawn quite a bit of interest. We've had a number of people approaching us. We will, of course, develop which witnesses we should hear from. So it's a good idea. Thank you. Thank you, Madame Chabot. Any other comments? Monsieur Vaughan, s'il vous plaît.
My boom down. Yeah, no, I think it's, just in reviewing even the witness submissions within our own caucus, it's a broad topic in terms of the way in which employment has changed, but clearly the system hasn't, and the computer hasn't either. There's two challenges. There's the EI was built for an employment structure for a generation ago. And it hasn't evolved as work patterns have changed, and you can hear it as each of us describe the regional footprints of employment in our ridings. It's for me, it's tech workers, highly paid jobs, but all on contracts that disappear when you have a bike accident. So I think we need to cast the net wide, not necessarily for witnesses. I think that's where the fine tuning comes in. But I think that in terms of the information that's out there, it'll be helpful. The one thing I would stress, though, is that the previous Parliament did the same study in a broad way. I believe Madame Chabot has tried to scope this a little bit to get at seasonal workers in particular, but also some of the challenges that are unique to a particular sort of resource-based dynamic as opposed to just the new ways people work. But I think that we need to cast that net wide. It'll mean a lot of reading for us, and since we have a couple of meetings to sort of sift through those reports, I'd say get the report out there and maybe hold off defining the witness list until we see exactly which direction we want to go.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Ms. Gazan, please.
Just a couple of points, Mr. Chair. I think, certainly Mr. Long brought up how archaic the EI system is, the technology, but he also mentioned OAS, other income guarantees, and I know I'm belaboring this point, but I think if we're going to be looking at income programs, certainly income programs for the gig economy, we know they've been really affected during COVID. I'm hoping that this committee does consider at least having one witness that can present testimony on guaranteed livable basic income. It's a concept that's accepted across party lines. And I do think it warrants some attention. And I think it's also something that's particularly popular for Canadians, including 60% of Albertans. So I'm hoping that we do spend some time looking at it. I think we'll be in the pandemic for another year. And a lot of people are going to run out of EI. How are we going to support Canadians? I think it is a critical discussion.
Hey, colleagues, I just want to bring you back to the question that I'm hoping that we're going to be able to resolve, and that is whether to issue this press release in its present form or whether not to issue it or to amend it. So if we can focus on the press release, the time for the breadth of the study, we can deal with that, but if we could just deal with the question of the press release for now. Madame Chabot, est-ce que ça c'était le point que vous avez voulu?
Was that the point that you wanted to raise, Madame Chabot? You're on mute, but you have the floor. With all respect I have for my colleagues, I think that it's two separate items. I understand what she's getting at, but right now we're talking, on the one hand, a reform of the system, and we'd like to hear witnesses. Each party will propose witnesses. And the matter of getting briefs and a lot of reading, I think that's very important too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Conservatives have no problem with the news release. I just want to confirm that this meeting is in public and not in camera.
It is. There was no motion to go in camera. We're in public.
Okay, so
now.
it is in public.
Yep.
Okay,
I
just want to confirm.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other interventions with respect to the news release? Do we have consensus to publish the news release as drafted? I see thumbs up all around. We'll take that as being adopted by consensus. Second item, you will have received 2 study budgets prepared by the clerk and circulated for approval. One is in connection with the study that we have currently undertaken, a study budget of $3,750. Let's deal with that one first. This, as you know, colleagues, is primarily for the provision of headsets and the like, because nobody's traveling these days. So the floor is open with respect to the approval of the $3,750 budget for the EI program study. Are there any interventions, any questions or comments? Seeing none, can we take the budget for this study as approved by consensus? I see consensus. It is adopted. You have a second budget before you with respect to the Rapid Housing Initiative study. Same narrative. Any interventions, any questions or comments with respect to the $2,500 budget for the examination of the Rapid Housing Initiative? Ms. Falk, please.
Thank you, Chair. Question I have is, you had mentioned that most of the cost of this is for headsets. So does that mean headsets are getting sent out to witnesses? And if so, how come they aren't using them when it comes time to a committee and then we have interpretation problems?
I'll take a run at your question, Ms. Falk, and then I'm going to pass it over to the clerk to fill in whatever what I haven't comprehensively answered. But my understanding is that some of the challenges that we have with respect to getting headsets to witnesses revolves around the amount of notice we give them before shipping a headset. So sometimes it can be laid at the feet of the witnesses. Sometimes it's just the logistics associated with not giving enough notice to make it happen. Madam Clerk, do you care to correct or supplement what I've just said?
You were perfect in that response. It's really a matter of transportation of the headsets. It takes approximately 3 days. And for places like Iqaluit, it takes up to 8 business days. These are business days. So planning ahead is very essential in terms of invitations, getting the confirmation organized, so we can send the headset as soon as possible.
Perfect, thanks. I just want to make sure we're being efficient and effective with taxpayers' dollars. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. Any other discussion, comments, questions with respect to the approval of the budget for the Rapid Housing Initiative study? Can we approve the budget by consensus? Do we require a vote? I believe I see consensus in the room that budget is adopted. The third item, colleagues, as you may be aware, Private Members Bill C-220, an act to amend the Canada Labour Code, Compassionate Care Leave, was referred to the committee by the House, I believe, yesterday. And so it's for us to now do an examination of that private member's bill and to report it back to the House. I know there have been some discussions between the parties, and the bill's sponsor, Mr. Genereux, is, as I understand it, available to come to the committee on Thursday. So I open the floor, one, for your thoughts on scheduling. How much time do you expect that we will need? And any other comments you have with respect to how we dispense with this matter that has been referred to us by the House. I recognize Mr. Housefather.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have indeed been in discussion with Mr. Genereux, including today. We both would propose that we cover the bill in 1 hour. I mean, 1 hour of testimony from Mr. Genereux and 1 hour of clause by clause afterwards, so that it would be completed in one meeting. And as you had mentioned, Mr. Chair, Mr. Genereux is ready to come to the committee as early as next Thursday. And you know, of course, he bows to whatever date the committee wishes to have him here. But you know, given the situation of wanting to get the bill back as quickly as possible to the House, I think it would be ideal if we could have this next Thursday. I think that there'll be amendments that all members of the committee and all parties will agree to. And hopefully, Mr. Chairman, you and the committee could agree to that. Thank you so much.
Mr. Housefather, Madame Chabot.
Well, I had a question, but Mr. Housefeather responded to that quite fully. I think we should try to get it done efficiently and quickly. I think it's a very straightforward bill. So I think that it could get done in a 1-2 hour meeting, depending on the availability, of course, of the sponsor of this bill. And I would be quite agreeable to that. Thank you. Mr. Viss.
I believe that we should have at least a little bit of time for some witnesses for MP Genereux's private members bill. And perhaps Mr. Housefather would be able to enlighten us about the friendly amendments to the legislation as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Viss. Any further interventions? Mr. Housefather, do you want to respond?
Sure, I'd be happy to respond to the two questions that Mr. Viss asked. Mr. Genereux himself had asked that it be one meeting. If you can consult with him, but I've had that conversation with him. He wants to get it over as quickly as possible in terms of getting the bill back to the House. And certainly if he has witnesses that he wants to appear with him in his 1 hour, he can always bring them if the committee agrees. And the second thing is we've gone over amendments, and basically it's one amendment that we would be extending bereavement leave to 10 days from 5 days, and it would apply as well to caregivers. So meaning all of those people in Matt's original bill, different caregivers, depending on where they were in their caregiving time frame, would get up to 3 weeks or no bereavement leave, depending on where they were in the process. And now what we will propose to the committee and what we both agreed to was that it would be 10 days of bereavement leave for everybody. Right now it's 5 days of bereavement leave for those who lose immediate family members. It would be extended to 10, and it would also encompass those who are caregivers. So they would also all get 10 days of bereavement leave. So it's a pretty simple amendment to the bill, and that's the only substantive amendment to the bill. And again, I'll as soon as Matt and I submit it properly to the clerk, we'll send copies to everybody and discuss it with everybody over the course of the next week. Thanks very much, Brad.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Ms. Doncho.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Housefather, for your feedback. And we largely agree, and looking forward to discussing your amendment at the meeting. Just two questions about, Mr. Chair, I think we should set a deadline for amendments to be submitted in the event that other opposition parties are also interested in amending the bill. I would suggest Monday or Tuesday at the very latest, just to provide parties enough time to see them and to discuss them and to ensure that Thursday goes smoothly. I agree with the date being Thursday. Happy to have Mr. Generou bring witnesses, but I did want to confirm if any of the other opposition parties or the Liberal Party are interested in bringing witnesses. If that's the case, then we should probably discuss what we believe is appropriate amount, particularly if we only have 2 hours to do all of it. So we're happy to have Mr. Generou, and then also a Conservative witness in addition. I believe that's how that works. Since it is his PMB, he comes, and then we can put forward a witness. So that would technically be 2. So I'm just wondering if there is interest from other parties to have witnesses, and if there is, then we may have to squeeze in 4 plus Mr. Generou in 1 hour. So I just want to make sure that we're aware of some of the time crunch that we may have if that's the case.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Doncho. Any, Mr. Housefather, did you want to respond to that, or is there any other interventions?
I'll only respond in saying that I think since we're all in agreement, I generally think in the principle of the bill, I think that I don't think that I can't speak for everybody, but I personally wouldn't see that we need to bring any additional witnesses to that. If he has many groups across the country who support the bill, and I assume that he will bring letters of support as he has brought to the Commons. But again, I bow to the will of the committee, but I don't really see, at least from my point of view, the need to bring additional witnesses. Thanks, Ms. Dangshaw.
Madame Chabot?
I don't see any, well, Mr. Generou brought the bill to the House. All the parties had an opportunity to speak to it. I don't see why we would need too many witnesses. If there's an amendment that seems to be a friendly amendment in any case, I would leave Mr. Generou the opportunity to be accompanied by another witness if he so chooses, but it may be that he's completely comfortable to come by himself. Thank you, Madam Chabot.
I think we have consensus. I'm going to propose the following, following on Ms. Doncho's recommendation, that any amendments that a member of the committee wishes to have considered should be submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. Eastern on Monday. That the committee consider Bill C-220 1 week from today, the 25th on Thursday. That the first witness be the sponsor of the bill, and that he be welcome to bring along any witness he wishes. And at the conclusion of witness testimony, which would normally be an hour, that we move to clause by clause. I think that also allows us the flexibility to add witnesses if that is the will of the sponsor or of the committee, but that we start with Mr. Genereux and exhaust the witnesses, which it appears will be just him and one, before we move to clause by clause. Is that acceptable? And if it is, do we need to put it in the form of a motion to be discussed and voted upon? I guess that's what I would propose based on what I've heard so far. Okay, I see some thumbs up. Okay, any discussion on that? If not, can we take that as the consensus? I think Ms. Doncho, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to confirm, I know you mentioned the witness list is due on Monday, but I just want to confirm that the amendments, if there are any, are due on Monday as well.
Okay,
just to catch up, that's what you said or not?
I meant to say amendments.
Oh, okay, great.
For Monday.
All right.
And that Mr. Genereux can bring a witness with him on Monday, and if there are suggestions for other witnesses, that we exhaust the witness list before going to clause by clause. But I anticipate that there won't be a witness list to exhaust. But I want to leave open the flexibility of that in case that's what people want between now and then. Okay. So do we have consensus to proceed in that fashion? Madam Clerk, is there anything we missed? Okay, I think we have that dealt with. Thank you. Finally, Sup C. So supplementary estimates C have been referred to the committee. For the last fiscal year, they were referred on Tuesday, February the 16th. Is it the wish of the committee to consider Sup Cs? As you know, there's a date at which they are deemed to be adopted, which I believe to be sometime in the end of March, or depending on when the last opposition day is. So the floor is open. Is it the will of the committee to examine and pass Sup Cs? And if so, who would you like to hear from on it? Madame Shabat.
Well, I lean towards saying no. I think that the date might be April, rather, but I don't want it to upset the proposed activities that we have already scheduled. Thank you, Madame Chabot. Ms. Dancho.
Mr. Chair, respectfully, I'll just have to strongly disagree with my colleague from the bloc. I do believe that given the pandemic, it's extremely important that we have the ministers come before this very important committee and discuss the subs and mains and share with the committee some of their challenges that they've had and answer our questions accordingly. And in fact, I do believe that it is critical that we have all four ministers join us for that, open to discussion of how much time should be allotted to each. But given the extraordinary circumstances we're in, I think it is very, very important that we have all four ministers come before committee.
Thank you, Ms. Doncho. I'm not sure whether the SUPs touch on the responsibilities of all four, but I absolutely take your point. Are there any other interventions? Mr. Vaughan.
Why don't we send the estimates and the request, the need to review them off to the subcommittee to figure out a schedule. Last time we ran into who should appear with who, whether there are a lot of, this is one committee that's got a lot of ministries attached to it. And just to sort of figure out where perhaps a priority might lie or what the structure should look like, maybe we should refer it to the subcommittee to work on what that schedule would look like and bring it back to the full committee for a conversation. There's pros and cons to every direction that's been expressed, including the work in front of us, which I know that Madam Chabot has been waiting a long time to get this EI study underway, and I respect the frustration she has. Just as we start, everything else fills the agenda, and that doesn't feel fair.
Ms. Doncho?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I understand and respect where my colleague, Mr. Bond, is coming from, but I do feel that if we do refer to subcommittee, it will just take up time from our next committee meeting and take away more time from the EI study. So probably best that we just figure this out today, I would think.
No, the practice has been is that we meet away from the committee so the committee doesn't lose meetings. We figure out what the compromises needs to look like so we don't skip a meeting talking about it this way. Instead, we do it offline and resolve the issue so that everybody feels comfortable. It actually saves us time in terms of getting to
just externally. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just given the time constraints we have, and I know how very, very busy the ministers are, and it is difficult to get them, although they do come, and that's great that they do, it is challenging to schedule with them, let alone 4. So I think it is important that we discuss it. At least we have some time left, about half an hour. It's probably best that we get that done now that we have the time, to just establish where each party is coming from and what they hope to see with the ministers.
Thank you. Madame Chabot. Madame Chabot, à vous la parole.
Très bonne idée de retourner ça.
An excellent idea. I think we should take the time to look at the study first of all. You have the B budget, your C budget. We've already met with some ministers. Do all of them have to be involved? Do they need the presence of ministers and only the ministers themselves? Given that we've already had an opportunity to discuss with them at HUMA, at this committee. But if we want to see what the scope of these votes are, I think it's a good idea to put it in a subcommittee.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to say that I do, certainly support MP Dancho's recommendation to have the ministers here for questions. I also agree with Adam in terms of scheduling. It goes really fast in a subcommittee meeting outside of here. And we can communicate to people within our parties, although it's easy for me because I'm the only one in the party representing the NDP here. But I think if we can communicate that to the representative that is on the subcommittee, it would probably go a lot faster in terms of scheduling and not take away from our meeting time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gazan. Are there any further interventions? Okay, colleagues, it's pretty clear that we do not have consensus and there are 2 issues before us. So I think, unless anyone has a better idea, we're probably going to have to put this to a vote. So the first issue, and I'm going to need a motion on this, is whether the committee does in fact conduct an examination of the sub-Cs. So we need to decide that, and then the second question would be whether if that is answered in the affirmative, then the second question would be whether the scheduling of the examination of the sub-Cs be referred to the subcommittee. So if I may, I'm now calling for a motion, please, that this committee conduct an examination of the supplementary Cs, including the calling of witnesses. Would someone move the motion for me? Thank you, Ms. Gazan. Is there any discussion on the motion?
So, sorry, would it be possible to just move a motion to move it all to the subcommittee and have the subcommittee report back with the proposed schedule that includes what we decide on, as opposed to saying, yes, right. I mean, I don't think we're going to say no. The question is saying let's come back with a firm understanding of what the impact of and where they will be scheduled, and we as parliament secretaries can try to figure out what the minister's schedules look like and have a committee conversation offline just to show how it fits into the EI study, how it fits into the EARN study, and how it fits into the proposal in front of us with the legislation that's come from the House. Just put it all together into a work plan that makes sense and takes into account things like the parliamentary breaks that are coming up for constituency weeks in March and ... Just let us take it aside, not say yes or no to it, because I don't think that's the answer to either question, but take it to the subcommittee, let the subcommittee come back with a work plan that sort of spells out what the next few weeks look like and include the concerns that are legitimately being raised by members around wanting to hear from certain ministers and certain officials.
If I understood Ms. Shabbat's intervention, it was that we not examine this. So that's what I heard, and I felt that we needed to dispense with that to move to the next step. But perhaps she's on the list here. Perhaps she feels differently. Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate and agree with most of what Mr. Vaughan has said, but I'm just a bit, I guess, a bit confused. I know Madame Chabot is very keen to continue on with her study and is concerned about the delays. I do recognize that, having had that happen to myself, but I'm just not clear. It sounds like the rest of the committee is open to having all four ministers come for SUPs. So I'm just not, is that not the case? Do the Liberal members of the committee not want the ministers to come for SUPs? Is that the case, or I'm just not clear?
It's not that. It's hard to, we have sort of three boats that have to come into harbor. We just need to know what order they're going to come in to understand what impact they might have on the EI study, and also getting our EARN study finalized and off to the minister. So we have two pieces of work in front of us. The SUPs sort of blow a hole in that, and I'm just saying let's get together and figure out what's the best way to schedule it, also based on when we think ministers may be available or not available. So it just helps us to sort of compose a coherent schedule that accommodates everything that people are saying, including, I think most importantly, what Madame Chabot said, and she'd been waiting almost a year for the study to start, almost a full year, and it just seems unfair. Just as we get to the start, we have four ministers come in on four meetings, and that blows the entire schedule until July.
How it goes, I think it's happening to all the committees right now, not just this one, as you know.
So I'm just saying, instead of saying yes or no tonight, let's punt it to the subcommittee. Let's have the subcommittee come back with a schedule that we can all work with, that meets all of our interests and doesn't put Madame Chabot in.
Mr. Vaughan, are you, Mr. Chair, if I may, I've never known a subcommittee to bring forward the minister's calendar. So are you committing to bringing forward their availability at the subcommittee?
As best we can to understand where it fits into the schedule, just so we will go away to find out where that schedule lies, what that schedule might look like, to get you the results and the appearances you want in a timely way, but to also understand and be respectful of the fact that Madame Chabot's been waiting literally 1 year to start her study.
I know many of I'll just finish. I know many of our opposition members in our party are been waiting a long time to speak with their members as well, their ministers. I know that's equally as important to them.
Madame Chabot. Madame Chabot.
Well, I raised my hand just to call everything back to order. It's a good discussion going on, but I said no. I'm usually not that blunt, but I am very preoccupied with the schedule, the agenda. Now, we have to take a look at if we had not looked at these votes earlier, I would be upset. I would be concerned that we should be doing something, but we did. I didn't read all of my emails. I don't know what kind of time we have ahead of us. I don't know which ministers should be invited in particular. And I'm sort of fixed on this idea that Dawn has said, well, I'm open to it. Let's have a look at it in subcommittee and see if we can fit all the pieces together in our agendas and timetables so that we can prioritize the study. And it's not by happenstance. If we still had 2 more years to look at something, well, all right, but we don't. I think that this study on reform of the system is based on the fact that in September, at the end of September, there's going to be a massive change in those supports. So I think I don't think that we can get too far off track on our calendar or our timetable. But look, put it to the subcommittee and we can get it done, resolved fairly quickly. Thank you very much, Madam Shabbat.
Go ahead, Ms. Kazan. You have the floor.
Can I propose that? I mean, I don't think there's any disagreement here. One is that which was the motion that we invite the minister for the subs, and the second vote was that the scheduling would occur during a subcommittee. So I don't think that interferes with Madame Chabot's goal of getting the study going. If we look at the scheduling in the subcommittee. And agree that the ministers will come here to review the subs.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kazan. So can I take it that there's no need to proceed with the first motion, and you're withdrawing it, and you're moving a second to have this matter moved to committee for scheduling?
No, what I'm saying is, like, can we get on with the vote on this? Because I think there's some agreement here, or maybe I'm missing something.
No, I think we're trying to get at the same thing through 2 different routes. I agree with you. There now appears to be consensus that we are going to have a look at the SUPs. That being the case, I would suggest that you withdraw the motion to determine whether we consider them, take that as a given by consensus, and let's move on to whether the subcommittee is going to be involved in the scheduling. You okay with that?
Okay, so I'm totally okay. I'll withdraw my motion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Viss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe the clerks can enlighten us about the motion previously passed by this committee regarding the appearance of ministers for supplementary estimates. I think that motion still stands. It does it not? And secondly, you guys heard me berate about the constitutional responsibility we all have to review how government spends money as well in the past. But I won't enlighten you all with that today.
No, we remember it well. Thank you. Madam Clerk, has there been an all-encompassing motion with respect to the examination of estimates that I think Mr. Viss was referring to? Maybe something that we did on the front end?
I'm looking at
I'm
looking at it. I will come back offline and discuss that with members. I'm looking at it right now. If you could give me a moment.
Sorry, what'd you say, Mr. Viss?
That was from MP Kusi.
Okay.
Because the committee did, in fact, adopt the previous schedule prior to prorogation, and then there was some back and forth at our first meeting after prorogation about the schedule of the committee. We thought we were going to have the opportunity to study new things, but then it went into something else. But that said, I'm really looking forward to the EI study before us today and the estimates.
Okay. Seeing no further hands up, I think the question, I think we have consensus that we're going to do an examination of the sub-Cs. The question is whether we move to the subcommittee the questions around availability of witnesses, scheduling, and allocation of time for the examination of sub-Cs. So that's the question. I will say that it was moved by Ms. Gazan. Is there any further discussion on that proposal, that motion? Okay. Do we, Ms. Dancho,
I just wanted to
ahead.
clarify. Can you repeat the motion? I'm sorry. I didn't have it written down.
Okay. That the committee engage in an examination of supplementary C estimates that the questions around allocation of time, identification of ministers and officials to appear, be delegated to the subcommittee and brought back before this committee for approval.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Falk, please.
Can there be a deadline added to that of when the subcommittee will bring that back to this committee?
Sure. What do you suggest?
I get. I'm. That's a good question. I mean, I don't sit on the subcommittee, so I'm not sure how often the subcommittee meets.
Yeah.
Or if it's just on the chair's call.
Yeah, it's as needed. So, end of next week.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Ms. Nacho. Yeah.
Would the subcommittee be available after the HUMA meeting on Tuesday? I just think we should get it done because if we're going to coordinate up to 4 ministers before the end of March, it's going to be, as Mr. Vaughn pointed out, there's spring break, and so, but best do it quickly. I would do it today if everyone was available, but I'm guessing they're not.
I can only speak for myself. So yeah, we'll try to get it done with all due haste. I can only speak for myself. I'll make myself available after the meeting on Tuesday.
I can meet after Tuesday as well.
Okay. Okay. So that looks positive. Madame Chabot.
Oui, si c'est possible.
Yes, if it's for next Tuesday, I can be available as well. Well, you know, there's also any complications that might arise for votes in the House, but after the committee, the regular committee, as soon as possible after that, even maybe in the so-called constituency writing week, we can still, the steering committee can still meet. We're all meeting virtually in any case. And, well, whatever staff we need to support the work. Thank you, Madame Chabot.
I thought I saw your hand up. Did you have an intervention?
No, I didn't, Chair. I was just, I'm just concerned because I am available, but I don't know what's come into my office in terms of requests.
Fair enough.
And what's been agreed to. I'm wondering if we can tentatively book it, but actually send that out to our offices so that our teams can book. I don't know what's come in, so I'm scared to book it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there may also be the question of House of Commons resources that we may have to deal with as well. So we will absolutely shoot to make this happen immediately after our meeting on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion, Ms. Nacho. So with that, do we have consensus to proceed in that fashion, that the subcommittee will seek to get its work done promptly, ideally as soon as this Tuesday? We have consensus, or do we need, I don't think we need a vote. I think we've talked this through. Okay, we will proceed in that fashion. So, in terms of our schedule then, colleagues, this coming Tuesday, the 23rd, we will have our second meeting on the EI study. There will be witnesses from the Canada Revenue Agency and Statistics Canada on the first panel. The second panel will be the C.D. Howe Institute. On Thursday, the 25th, we will commence our examination of Bill C-20. The week following is a constituency week, and depending on the work of the subcommittee, that will dictate what will be done when we return. So that's a bit of a look ahead. Is there any other business to come before the meeting? Is it the will of the committee to adjourn? I think it is. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for this. Madame Chabot, vous avez levé votre main.
Désolé, je peux allonger la réunion.
I have a question. We have until the 9th of February to offer you a list of our witnesses for the EI. I know that's not we have in the calendar. We have a bunch of experts coming to talk to us. And we're going to make a lot of calls to see who's going to be called. People want to know if they're going to appear or not. I'm not the only one who gave you some idea of the witnesses I'd like. And we have to get arranged for that too. Well, perhaps we'll get the assistance of the clerk on that, but you're quite correct. All parties submitted witness lists. Generally speaking, each party will have their priority witness choices, and that will be respected as much as possible. And perhaps the clerk can fill in where I'm missing any details. We've received lists of witnesses from all of the parties, each of the parties. And perhaps when the subcommittee meets, we can discuss, first of all, a schedule or dates of meetings, and then we can organize and regroup the various witnesses at that time. Well, thank you very much. So when the subcommittee meets, we'll be discussing the witness lists and how to and arrange the logistics of the calendar. Well, you'll have at least sitting dates, yes, a calendar at least. Can we have the, what, will we receive a formal list of witnesses then? If it's the will of the members, yes, I can share the lists, plural, yes. Yes, thank you very much. That's good. Thank you very much, Madame Chabot. And thanks to our clerk. Are there any further, anything else that we need to do as business today?
We have consensus to adjourn. I believe we do. Have a nice weekend. We'll see you on Tuesday. Thank you.